Hey everyone, I'm back, and today we're going to be talking about Scream, the fifth one, or Five Cream, as you might want to call it. I like to call it that just because I get a laugh out of it. I'm just going to go over my thoughts over the four previous Scream movies in this franchise, and I'm a fan of these movies. I like the first one, I love the second one, and that would be my favorite out of this franchise, is Scream 2. I really love the second movie. And I'll get into it a bit more in just a second. And Scream 3, that one's fine. And Scripforum, or Scream 4, whatever you want to call it, that one was decent, and I didn't regret watching it, and it was better than Scream 3. By now it should be clear that I'm a fan of this franchise, and as for my brief thoughts with this newest film, I was looking forward to it, and I was really hoping it would capture the tone that I love from this franchise, blending horror and comedy, being a satire of horror movies while at the same time being its own thing. And I was really hoping that it would have that. And it does capture that tone that I like sometimes, and the kills were kind of fun, and the practical effects and the blood looked well done, and there are parts of it that I do like, and some ideas are decent, and unfortunately by the end of it I was pretty disappointed by this movie. And one of my biggest issues with this movie would be that, unlike the first four movies, or at least from memory, this movie takes itself weirdly seriously and kind of just becomes just a straightforward slasher movie. And once you do that, you're kind of making it indistinguishable from any other slasher movie, and you just made a dumb movie that's kind of trying to be Scream, but it kind of just fails in everything that it's trying to do because it doesn't really know what it is, and it brings back characters from the original series, which I do like on paper, but where my issue with doing that comes in would be that what they have to do in the movie. They bring back Dewey, they bring back Gale Weathers, they bring back Sidney Prescott. Dewey, he serves a purpose in the story, and he does help out our main character, like, figure things out, and he helps progress the story along, and he's a major part of the movie whenever he's a part of the story. And Gale Weathers and Sidney Prescott, they're in the movie, but they add nothing to the film. They have nothing to do. Gale Weathers doesn't report on anything. She's not researching anything. She's just there to remind us that there was a romance between her and Dewey. And I thought when those two characters were reunited for one scene, I thought that scene was great and one of the standouts in the entire film, and I thought it was very well handled. But after that, she has nothing else to do in the movie. She's just moving along with Sidney Prescott, and that's it. She's in a car, and she's not doing anything. And Sidney Prescott enters into the film like 2/3 into it, so like, as in, she's introduced like 1/3 into it, and doesn't get involved into the story until 2/3 into it. And she doesn't do anything. Without spoiling anything, there's a reason why she's there, because it's part of Ghostface's plan. And that's one of the things you're expecting in a Scream movie, is like the twist. Who is Ghostface? And what kind of link does he have to these characters' past? And I can understand it on a very, very basic level. But once you start to break down the movie, there are so many things that just don't make any sense. And there's one scene in particular, it doesn't hurt the movie too much, but there's one scene in the movie where Ghostface is in broad daylight, and there's no satire of any kind that I can find when they're doing this. And I remember this happening in the first Scream movie, where you can see Ghostface in broad daylight, but in that movie it made a bit more sense. But personally, I feel as though it's better to have him in the dark, because he kind of just looks goofy if you have him in broad daylight. That's just my personal opinion. And also, the build-up to the reveal of who Ghostface is in this movie is so poorly handled, and There's some really over the top acting, and that really pulled me out of the movie. And there are parts where characters are supposed to be screaming, and they just looked like they were laughing, and I just didn't buy them as their character. And I don't think all of the performances in this movie were terrible. I do feel as though people were trying, but I do feel as though they kind of took it too far because of how the tone was handled in the movie. Whereas in the previous films, they handled the balance between horror and comedy very well, for the most part. And everything that it was going for made sense. In this movie, it's just, it abandons the comedy and just goes straight to as a horror movie. And any attempt at humor was really poorly handled, and it did not land for me at all. And the music in this movie was really bad, and it sounded like it was actually trying to scare you, and it was just so bad. And I thought the music in this movie was really awful and distracting, and there are jump scares in this movie. And like I keep saying that the first Scream movie is like a parody, but also its own thing when it comes to horror movies. In these movies, normally jump scares would be kind of a joke, especially false jump scares, but in this movie they're taken completely seriously, and it does not work whatsoever. Even the false ones do not work. I don't find them funny, and it just gives off the impression that it doesn't know what it is. I was never really all that bored while watching the movie, but I just feel as though this movie doesn't really explore anything all that interesting story-wise. And I might be wrong on this, but in the previous movies, there was a lot going on in the plot, and it felt like it was taking its time, and it allowed a lot of it to breathe and to like have all these characters put together this huge puzzle of who Ghostface is. And in this movie, it doesn't really feel like a puzzle. It's just moving from point A to point B and then to point C. And it doesn't really work. It doesn't feel like a puzzle. It just feels like we're moving along and just waiting for a reveal, like we're in a Saw movie. And what I mean by that is that you're just waiting for a twist to happen instead of characters putting together these puzzle pieces and maybe not understanding the whole story, but you do feel as though there was a puzzle to it. In this movie, I never got that feeling whatsoever. And what I was going to say earlier was that by the end of it, this movie was slightly under 2 hours, and I thought that this movie was the longest one, and it just felt like it had so much filler in it. But I did some research, and apparently Scream 2 is the longest one. It's exactly 2 hours, and I had to I looked it up on Google to see which one was the longest one. It was Scream 2, and sometimes it's wrong, so I decided to just look at the physical discs of these movies just to find out if that's actually true. And I was like, what? Scream 2 is the longest one? From memory, it does not feel that way to me at all. It completely earned its runtime, and I was never really bored while watching that movie. And I'm just so engaged in what's going on, and in this movie, it just feels like things are just happening, and while I'm not super bored by it, it doesn't leave much of an impression on me. And there was some really forced drama in the movie that I just did not care for whatsoever, and the build up to revealing Ghostface without spoiling anything was so obvious to me, and it was so poorly handled. I wish that this movie did a much better job at the build-up, but unfortunately that just did not happen in this movie. And apparently, little side note, we're getting a sixth Scream movie that's supposed to come out in March of 2023, and at the time of recording this, I haven't seen any ads for it, and maybe when this review is up, I might see it, but as of now, it's like 5 months away. Like normally you would have a trailer out by now, but I guess we'll see. And also I kind of wanted to mention the trailer for Five Cream, because I feel like calling it that. It was very misleading in terms of its tone. Like, you watch the trailer and it gives you this really cool and like kind of suspenseful build up to like horror and like in terms of the trailer's tone, and you watch the movie and you never once get that tone. And that was very disappointing to me because I was hoping that I would at least get some resemblance of that tone, and even though I knew what Scream was kind of going for, or what the series is known for, sorry, like horror and comedy mixed together, I was just thinking since Wes Craven's no longer attached, maybe they're going to go in a different direction, and in a way they did, but it didn't really pay off. And that's about all I have to say about Five Cream. It was disappointing, to say the least. It wasn't great, and I didn't regret watching it immediately after I finished it. It's just that it's one of those movies where there's a lot to talk about, and I'm probably going to rewatch it when Scream 6 comes out, and probably to go in really in depth with this movie as to like all of my issues with it in a like spoiler filled review that's like can be like I don't even know how long, but like just go through the entire movie, list everything that's wrong with this movie and why it's just kind of broken. Even though there are parts of it that I do like, this movie is pretty broken at many points, and I just wished it was a lot better. And before watching this movie, my least favorite Scream movie was the third movie. I thought that, just to sum everything up, the third one, the reason why it was my least favorite is because although it does still have the tone that I like, and that's one thing that is consistent about the third movie as opposed to this movie, it was really stupid and it just made things unbelievable and made things feel poorly thought out, but there were still parts of it that I liked, and it didn't just throw characters into the movie with no purpose whatsoever, and it had them do nothing in the film aside from just being there to like please the fans of the originals. And that's something that I admire about the third movie now, whereas this movie is the antithesis of the third movie in ways where it does so many things wrong, and it wasn't what I was wanting from this franchise, unfortunately. And when I finished watching this movie, I was thinking like it was okay, and thinking like a 5 out of 10, but just thinking about it and letting it sit with me, and the more I thought about it, it kind of just got worse, and it's not good, and I cannot give it a 5, unfortunately. I have to go lower, and with all that being said, I'm going to give Scream, the new one from 2022, or 5 Cream, whatever you want to call it, a 4 out of 10. Thank you for watching my videos. As always, if you enjoyed this review, be sure to leave a like and comment down below what you thought of Scream, the 2022, or 5 Cream, whatever you want to call it. Again, why did they have to call it Scream? Couldn't you just... What is wrong with numbers? Like, seriously, like, the fourth film wasn't afraid of a number, and sure, you could say they kind of cheated it by just replacing one of the letters with 4, but it's a number at least. Like, if Saw can have 5 in the title, Scream can have 5 in the title. Like, come on. Anyways, tell me what you thought of it down below, and my social media links, they will all be in the description, so follow me there. And last but not least, subscribe to be a part of Fully Nation, and I'll see you when I get my next review up, and that is going to be for Friday the 13th, Part 3. So look forward to that, but until I get that up, thank you for watching, and have a great day.